So I'm really hoping that the sound quality on this is not giving diabolical. This is good. This is the frosted donut. So this conversation is going to be very, very unhappy, very unpleasant. And we're pretty much just going to be talking about the comparison, right? I think when you take a group of people, i.e. group of people being African Americans, and you put them in spaces where there's integration and there is a seemingly sense of progression, right? There's integration. They are feeling accepted in white spaces that were once segregated and relegated only to white people. But then you put them in these spaces, but you don't give them context. You put them in these spaces, but you don't give them education. And one of the biggest grievances that I would say is you find yourself in this space, right? So you're a Black woman, you've listened to all the red pill content, or maybe you've listened to some of the misogynistic content, or you've subscribed to what the world says about Black women, which some may be true, but again, you have to understand lack of context, right? So you do things differently. You change yourself, right? As a Black man, you start the business, you begin to do all these things, but what people don't tell you is the one thing that has not changed is systemic, right? The systemic ideologies, the systemic rules and regulations, the laws, and more so the paradigms that really govern the Black existence has not changed. And so here you are in this Black space, and you're on Instagram, and you're doing all these things, and you'll find yourself assimilating more and more and becoming more and more palatable, but you won't actually see yourself reaping those rewards. And I think one of the biggest grievances I would say from that is just the grievance of being Black in America. I know that this is like, dang girl, like how you gonna come on here and say all this where, there's previous content and I'm always talking about self-development and self-improvement, but this conversation was so important to me. And I just felt like it was very pertinent, especially today as I was out with my aunt and, we were at the bar, we were having drinks, we were talking and laughing and things like that. And we were just noticing the difference, right? And I think that this is exactly what every Black man and Black woman is doing in modern day America, is you're noticing the differences between white culture and Black culture. You're starting to notice, wow, these women are so free, or wow, these women are so this, or men are comparing and they're saying, wow, these women are so feminine, and all these different things. But what you're not really taking into consideration is the historical context. And if not the historical context, then just take into consideration the context in general. I think one thing that was very evident to me is that when you don't really endure a certain type of experience, right, because of the color of your skin, when you don't have to constantly, brace other people for your presence, when you're allowed to take up space and there are other people who literally look like you, and this is, you know what I mean? When you go places and you are the majority, right? When you enter just certain bars and restaurants and cities and blocks and everywhere, and it's like this whole town is literally painted with people who look like you, it is so different. When you start talking about wealth and inequality, and this is not really going to be an educational video, I think this is more so going to be like an observation, and it probably could have been a column because this is really based on my observations and my experience from today, but there's a huge grievance in that, because you start to realize that even though this world is progressing, and even though, Black people are being represented here and there, and we're on ads and we're in beauty and we're doing these different things, you start to realize that at the end of the day, the color of your skin still handicaps you in so many different ways. And that right there is just something that is truly the Black experience. Like, it's really something that is a sincere grievance, because, you start to compare yourself to other cultures and you start to say, well, I deserve X, Y, and Z. But the realism is that the people who have certain opportunities, who are able to leverage and go and to do certain things, they have different privileges, and they are, the ones who may look a certain type of way. They may have a lighter skin color. If they don't have a lighter skin color, they may have a different hair texture, right? The closer you are to some type of mixedness, right? This mixedness, it doesn't have to necessarily be with like white or, Caucasian. I think that's what we're saying today, to be more progressive. It doesn't have to be necessarily mixed with white, but like the more mixed you are with something and you're, coupled with your Blackness, the better chances you have at upward mobility. And, you know, I kind of talked about this very briefly. I don't know if I ever uploaded the video, but I was just talking about the film that I watched. I can't think of the name of the film, y'all. I'm so sorry. This is probably a bad day to like really record a video, but I just wanted to come on and share. But there's the film. It's on Netflix. And the film, I can't think of the name of it. But basically, there was a black woman. She was light-skinned. Her and her mother were light-skinned black women. They assimilated into white culture, and they pretty much portrayed themselves as white women. And they were able to marry, her daughter was able to marry a white man. The mother eventually became an heir. And they pretty much just kind of accumulated white wealth. And when you start thinking about black culture, you start thinking about the roots of it, and you start talking about generational wealth and people who go to college and these Ivy Leagues, and like how someone made a sacrifice, right, to negate their blackness, and how we can literally see from a historical historical perspective, but even just like continually, how a lot of times we have to negate our blackness. And even if that is, you know, right, because hear me out, it's not always negating certain stereotypes about black people. It's not always negating, okay, yeah, we're loud, you know what I mean? It's not always negating hip hop music, okay? It's not always negating, you know, it's not always negating those things. Sometimes it's literally like you have to literally step out of your skin and to put on a show for other people. And I think people who have like a more fairer skin and who look more mixed with something have a better chance and opportunity at assimilating in upward mobility in a modern culture, to accumulate more wealth and more status. And that's just something we don't talk about. And so the biggest grievance with, you know, within the black community, within our relationships and so forth, is just really how there's a huge wealth disparity, racial like, you know what I mean? Like when I'm actually, hold on, let me show you the book I'm reading. So I'm currently reading How to Kill a City. And it just kind of talks about what happened in Katrina and how pretty much literally the city was built intentionally to wipe out, I think it was the Little Nine, I want to say, Little Nine. I low-key want to pick up the book just to kind of like, you know, get it into like, you know. But anyway, the city literally built the wall, the dam, you know what I mean, the concrete, to literally protect those who were in like white communities versus those who were in black communities. And like pretty much when Katrina hit, only those who were in the black community were mostly impacted. And when a lot of the elites and politicians came to talk about Katrina and the rebuilding and the restoration, they really just kind of honed in on the fact that they no longer wanted the city to be like it was. They pretty much talked down on the black community. They said that it was poverty, that people were impoverished. They talked about how, you know, they promised a lot of black landowners that they were going to help them rebuild their land, all these different things, and they never did that. A lot of those landowners did a lot of the work for free, a lot of the reconstruction work for free. They never were compensated. And I just think that it's like, it's really unfortunate, y'all, because it's like you look at modern day culture and it's like, you can't help but as a black person to really have a disdain for yourself and for those who are in your community. You know, it is something that is so internalized. And I really feel like I low-key let you guys down with this video because I kind of feel like I could have came on a little bit more constructed, a little bit more together, but you know, bear with me. But it's just really unfortunate because you just kind of start to realize, like, you know, you start to have so many internalized insecurities, so many things that you feel like you have to put on. You have to, you know, look a certain type of way. You have to wear a certain type of designer brand. And it's not just to kind of compete. It's just more so to say, look, I am worthy. I am competent. Black people don't have the privilege of just being enough. So I think in all of our work, which is 100% needed, right? The work that we put in to say, hey, look, you know what I mean? You are worthy. You know, we do the affirmations, we do all the things, but the reality is that unfortunately, just being a black person, you are not afforded the privilege of just being enough, right? You don't get to just work a job and be a teacher. I had someone say that the reason why, you know, certain women are able to just work and do their hobbies and have certain jobs is because their man is the breadwinner, or yeah, this is the breadwinner. And you know, you can obviously trace that back to, you know, inequality in terms of wealth and things like that. But it's just like, you also have to just kind of take into the consideration, like, there's so much privilege in literally being a white person. Like, people will automatically assume that your husband is wealthy or rich or whatever the case may be just because of the color of your skin. when none of that stuff is true. You know what I mean? There are poor white people, but you would never believe it. You would think that they are like the minority. You would think, and honestly, I feel sorry. I have so much compassion and empathy for the people who are poor, because they're not really seen outside of their privilege. They're kind of kept in this cage. So now they find themselves, showing up feeling entitled, you know what I mean, when they're in spaces where they may need help, or whatever the case may be, or they may struggle with superiority to the point where it's like they can't even really accept the help, even if they need it, right? They still have to feel like they're superior to somebody, even when they're just dirt poor as everybody else, So there's not really a lot of collaboration there. But I think all in all, it's like, yeah, it really sucks, And so it's crazy. I always think about just how you have celebrities, and you have these celebrities who are dealing with so much internal stuff, right? They're hauling off these wealthy men, beating their girlfriends, beating up their wives, and you have these wealthy people, and it's like they even feel like they have to keep up this facade to just keep up with people, and they might not even have the money. You have these black capitalists who essentially just exploit the black community. You know what I mean? Beyonce cash grabbing Carter. You know what I mean? And it's just like, you just kind of get to that point where you just like, what do you do? So I think all in all, I said this in a previous episode, but I really do believe that when it comes to the black movement, right? When it comes to black activism, that's what I was going to say. When it comes to black activism, it's lost on us because money is the factor, right? I think one of the biggest things that really broke down advocacy and all of that, I don't really think it was more so like the fear mongering from like the murders and the lynchings and things like that of some of our black leaders, as much as I just think it was like the cash grabs, right? Black people were really being starved out, and it's continuous. And it's really unfortunate because you don't really hear about these things unless you honestly are a reader. Like, I'm just being honest. Like, you literally have to be someone who is well read to really see, because the media has done such a good job at crafting imagery that makes you think that everybody has potential, and so you look down on people who may not have a certain type of life or whatever, aesthetic or whatever, and you just automatically assume that this person is the way that they are, and you look down on them, and you know what I mean, instead of you really understanding, like, wait a minute, no, these are the things that have impacted a lot of people, and this is continuous. So it's a huge grievance. I think it's a huge grievance, and I think even for myself, having a little bit of privilege in certain ways, and I think youth, right? Youth and vitality, but I wouldn't really say that's a privilege. I think youth and vitality is just one of those things that you really want to try to use to your advantage. Sidebar, and I get it, because the thing is, like, when you get older, the opportunities kind of dwindle down, so there's that. So I think we're dealing with the realism, but we're also dealing with social media. And I think that this conversation kind of just like shines a light on the realism, and then it shines a light on social media and just how carefully crafted the media is and the images are that go out online, whether it's for, a public figure and, their image and their branding, right? Or if it's for, just to kind of show that this is the interpretation of the world. This is the interpretation of America. This is how we've grown. This is how we've progressed, even if there really isn't much progression there. And I think what we're doing today is we're low-key siloing out a lot of black people, and we're kind of erasing a lot of black people. I think a lot of black people are really being forced to assimilate into like white culture. And it's not anything that's like, oh, we're integrating, we're progressing. It's more so just like starvation. You know what I mean? Starvation. It's more so like out of will. But a lot of times these conversations just seem a little too conscious for the social media fed brain, because it really goes against everything that you've read. And it kind of leans on the fence of like conspiracy, because if it's only in a book and you're the only person who read the book, where do we go from there, right? Hence book bannings. So I don't know, I always say this. In part, I wish I grew up and I wish I had the experience of living in a more progressive city, right? Such as LA, such as New York. And I always say that because I just genuinely feel like growing up in a more progressive city, I would have a different perspective. But I grew up in a very racially segregated city. Like, my city is very segregated. Even the states next to us, like, very segregated where I'm from. So unfortunately, I just didn't really grow up with that environment. But I always say, like, I wonder, would I have a different perspective growing up somewhere else where it's just like, completely segregated? I mean, where it's, you know, progressive. And I don't know, you know, I'm always willing to like humbly admit that, but I think at the end of the day, I'm someone who's really passionate about like justice, you know, and like certain things. So it's just different, you know. But anyway, that's the Black experience. You know, it's this very tiresome experience of always having to perform. It's this very tiresome experience of like always have to be at your best, right? I think this is why in part we were debunking Black excellence, because it's like we're no longer in a space where it's like Black people don't really get to be. We don't get to just be. We don't get to just work a job, go to college, get a job, and that just be the end. You know, we have to have businesses. We have to have a lot of money. You know, so our worth is so different compared to someone else who may have just privilege, and you know what I mean? Like, it's so different. And I don't know if that's because we come from a deficit, or if that's because of America's depictions of us, or whatever the case may be, but it's something that is deeply, deeply ingrained in so many of us. I have not yet met a Black person who is just okay with like themselves, who doesn't feel the need to like, you know, it is not necessarily put on or like keep up with the latest and the greatest, or even like buy the most expensive thing, or you know what I mean? It's nothing like that. It's just more so like, it's just so rare when you meet Black people who don't struggle with this very, very complex identity of just like being a Black person in America.